So now for something quite a bit different. So I'm here to talk to you about Tef-wel, which is a concept which has come out of my doctoral research. I'm actually an academic practitioner, so I'm a partner in a consultancy. I've been developing learning and development and e-learning programs for 30 years, which makes me incredibly old. In the last 5 years, I moved towards academia, so I'm a bit of a hybrid. So I'm a final year doctoral student at the University of Chester. Luke, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've now got 10 minutes to give you a whirlwind tour of one of the aspects of my research. Please stop
Correct.
me if brilliant. Please stop me if there's any questions. I'm unable to read chat while I'm presenting. I've always struggled with it. I'm sorry. So if there's anything, please stop me, or I can answer those at the end. So the problem I identified as part of my research was 20 years of static screenshots. So when we start research, we obviously look at what's going on and in scholarly research. And for me, in academia, I noticed that we were consistently measuring our global programs with a tick these boxes at the end or give us a 5-star rating. And as an instructional designer, I always thought that was a little bit tough because either people don't want to do it or they're fed up of the module, they hated it so much and you get an awful review, but it wasn't really telling me a lot of stuff. So often we were using end of module knowledge checks. Sometimes if we were developing a new program, we'll do one-off interviews or focus groups. But I really felt as a qualitative researcher that these were flattening the learning journey to a single point in time and really obscuring what the learner was actually going through. I've done a lot of e-learning over the years, and my study focuses specifically on workplace learning because that's where I've been a developer historically. So my doctoral research, listening across time, was one of the aspects of my research. And what I did was quasi-longitudinal interviews and a qualitative study. So I developed a problem-solving module. I chose problem-solving. I'm a designer as well, so it was easy for me to create an artifact. And I chose problem-solving because it's a universal skill. And it's one that we want to develop as a huge part of Industry and Education 5.0. So that was one I was quite passionate about. I interviewed 10 participants across 6 industries, and I did 30 interviews. So I interviewed them before the module, and that was to create a baseline of their prior experiences with e-learning, their expectations and their confidence about what they were going to go through within this e-learning module that I was giving them. 3 weeks later, I checked them through the module. They were given the first half of the module. It was a module that consisted of lots of different aspects of videos, multimodal aspects, learning, reading, reflecting, branching scenarios, etc. I asked them about their motivation, their engagement, and their experiences so far. So we did another deep dive. I then sent them the second part of the module, which was very similar, and obviously the content was progressing, but it had very similar aspects in terms of active learning, etc., to see what they enjoyed and didn't enjoy. Finally, I did a post-module evaluation where I asked them to reflect across the learner journey, the last part of the module, and also consider holistically their experience, had their motivation, had their engagement, has the way they were retaining the information changed over time. 3 key temporal themes came out of that. I'm preaching to the converted because I know I'm talking to, usually my audiences don't know anything about e-learning, but I know you guys too. So sorry if this is quite obvious, but there was a huge shift that I saw there in terms of motivation. Workplace learners, very much, there's an awful lot of antagonism, as you'll all know, around compliance training. I actually had a theme in my research, which was compliance dread, something you have to do every year, and they were felt obliged to. The impact of that is there was not a lot of ownership. A lot of people didn't feel they'd chosen to do that, which is obviously a lot more prevalent in people who have decided to do ongoing and lifelong learning. There was a change during the module, relevance and authenticity. There was motivation was driven to continue by how relevant it was. How authentic did they feel the learning? How much did it apply to their work? And at the end, obviously, can I apply this? Do I want to finish it? Because I think it's going to give me some value. Evolving engagement was pretty similar, and there was a huge change over time there. A lot of skepticism. Why do I have to do this? It was very difficult to find 10 people, by the way, about their experience. And that was because I was asking them not about e-learning that I developed, which I'm not saying is perfect, but I like to think I'm quite inclusive and interactive with my learning. They'd been through some very bad learning. A lot of people were scarred by click 65 pages of PowerPoint and, do I really need to do this? So they were very interested and they developed a lot of engagement, as you would expect, around the experimentation and the feedback. One of the participants, the younger participants in my group, coined a great term. I get a dopamine hit by the interactive quizzes. I've always used quizzes at the end, but there was a real push for using quizzes throughout the module to just sense check and give you that dopamine hit. And then reflection and agency. How much ownership did they have over the learning? And what opportunities were they given to reflect on what they'd learned throughout? Retention and transfer, forgetting and fragile recall. This was interesting. A lot of people couldn't remember the e-learning they did. They just knew a lot of it, especially the compliance was really difficult. They remembered the bad experiences, but not so much the good ones. Obviously, scaffolding helped retention, as we know, throughout the module. Again, not over scaffolding, because a lot of people said, actually, I don't want to feel patronized. That came out a lot with my, in particular, today isn't about my neurodivergent sample, but I've gone on to do a lot more work there because of some of those insights. And there was a view that we don't want over scaffolding there. Application and engagement. As we know, people need to use things to retain the knowledge. So there was a lot of talk when people look back about the branching scenarios and how they'd applied that learning. What the learners said, you can probably tell I'm a qual researcher because I just love some of these quotes. So the baseline, there was, as I said, a huge amount of feeling I have to do e-learning every year. I take a big sigh every December when I see it. This was particularly prevalent because I had a number of learners who are working in very compliance-driven industries. I think there was a general feeling that you asked me to do the same thing, you haven't even changed it. Why do I have to go through it all again? So it was about what's the purpose, being clear about what the purpose is there. Midpoint, there was a lot of motivation when people realised it was going to be relevant in their workplace. Those that didn't see the relevance struggled to really engage. And then post-module, how can you put that into practice? So as part of extending that learning to a blended learning in a way, if you have some knowledge, if you have some experience, if you can relate to your work, taking that intrinsic ownership was key. What they said about involved engagement, at the beginning, a lot of people talked about struggling to get engaged with e-learning because of poor instructional design. And this was quite an insight for me because historically, I'd always thought about let's make it as engaging as possible. And in fact, some of the things I thought were engaging were jarring on some of my participants. So you'll all have had the click all these different areas. So there was a number of people that were saying, well, do I click? Don't I click? Do I need to click? What's the purpose here? So there was some questioning about one of the themes came out was engagement needs to be purposeful. So why is it designed that way? Branching scenarios, I've published a paper I've put at the end around that and the importance. I develop content largely for supply chain and operational excellence. So you're in quite high risk scenarios as well. So isn't it great to have that fail safe learning, not just from a personal perspective, it's okay if you fail, no one's judging you. And again, what is failure really apart from learning? But can you test scenarios that would be maybe high risk to do in person, forklift trucks, all that sort of thing, and decisions that you would make there? I had people that were going back and doing the incorrect options as well because they got it right first time just to see what they could have done wrong. So that was a really interesting insight for me, that exploration. And then finally, the action questions, as we know, applying the learning, the reflection, thinking about what you've done. Knowledge retention, you won't be surprised. It's a good thing I did quasi-longitudinal, which was a short longitudinal study because 7 out of 10 participants couldn't poor things couldn't remember things from the 3 weeks. So if I'd have done longer, I don't know what would have happened there. I actually had a couple of people on the last interview that said, I know you told me not to, but I did it again last night because I was worried that you were going to be angry at me. And I just thought that was quite an insight. And of course, I never would have been angry, but what an insight that the recall was so low. And the things that stuck were the active engagement, as you say. Before, normally I forget most of it by the time I get back to my desk. An interesting one, scaffolded retention. I put in place, because I come from supply chain, I put in place a number of models. You may or may not have heard of the 5 whys, where you're looking for root causes of things, why, and then you get to the root cause. People found that really powerful because it's adaptable to whatever they're doing. So a lot of people like the models and the summary, something you could really use. Finally,
can we come to an end soon, please? Can we come to an end soon, please?
Perfect. Yes, one more slide. I think putting knowledge into practice, retaining it for longer. So making sure we do that. So the framework is around, can we think about tracking time as data, as Neil calls it? So it's something that I found really interesting. Can we look at a way of baseline mapping, maybe looking at prior experience, expectations and motivation? Can you do things like baseline surveys, readiness checks, learner self-reflection to gauge that before and make sure the module's relevant? Mid-engagement, process checkpoints. Can we track engagement shifts? How do things change over time? Interaction patterns and emerging understanding. Could perhaps do that through in-module checks built within the module, LMS analytics, as we know, or asking people to do reflective journaling and using that to improve their learner experience and also develop our instructional design. And then afterwards, let's just not ask for a 5-point, did you like it or didn't you like it? Can we help understand how they've retained that and transferred it to practice? Meaningful application. Why this matters for practice, we could identify disengagement in real time and pinpoint when and why motivation drops. Really good for the organisation, really good for us to understand as designers. Can we scaffold the learner journey more to help reduce cognitive load? My academic lens, as you probably gathered, is cognitive load. Boost interactivity mid-module. I talk about branching scenarios in one of my papers. I've included the reference at the end there. And develop learning that really sticks and adds value to organisations. Aligning with industry and education 5.0, can we make sure learning is adaptable by building in these frameworks? Can we put the human, can we put the learner at the start, in the middle of the learner journey and centralise them? And inclusivity, can we capture those diverse journeys? So including different types of learners, including neurodivergent learners and maybe people that learn a little bit differently. So the final question is, how might we measure success in online learning differently? Key takeaways, again, not preaching to the converted because I'm sure you've got all, but my thoughts are, can we stop flattening the learning journey to single moments? Can we treat time as data and really get insight from that? Can we design evaluation around the learner journey? And the fact that motivation, engagement and knowledge retention are cyclical, they're not one-off activities. And this has just been published in the Journal of Work Applied Management. I put the reference link at the end for anyone that's interested. I thank you very, very much for your time and I welcome any questions.